All right, everybody, so what I've got here is pretty much full-scale Battle of Waterloo, minus the terrain features, and obviously minus any paint. So go ahead and get your any jokes that have to do with the word gray out of your system, and we'll continue. You good? Got it? All right. So Napoleon's Battles is what I've been working with, and I have the original edition, and then I guess this is the most recent edition. I think there's one in between, if I'm not mistaken. What are the differences? I don't know that there's really any fundamental differences between the two, other than aesthetics, I think is about it. So, you know, I've been going back and forth on how to mess with this and trying different things, and I thought, you know what, rather than changing it up and switching it up like I normally do, let's just play the system the way it's meant to be played, that is to say the Napoleon's Battles system, and decide what we think and then go from there. So what I think is, I think it's a fine system. I think also there are games that are meant to be played with 2 or more people, not because they cannot be played with one person, but because there's just too much. It becomes overwhelming for one person such that things get bogged down time-wise. So it goes without saying that there's a fair amount of units on here that need to be dealt with, maneuvered, etc., and that goes for both sides. But when you run through, let's see, the sequence of play consists of, where are we at here? All right, so this is the sequence of play, and some of this stuff is optional. They include it in the advanced rules, and basically though, you have a rally step, a command step, in which you have all kinds of commander checks to make sure everybody's in command, especially with the French. They've got like at least double or even triple the amount of commanders that the Anglo-Allies have. Then you deal with maneuver phase, and that is dealing with movement, and a reaction step for the non-phasing player. You can earmark as the non-phasing player cavalry to move, I guess you call it counter move, in response to the phasing player's moves. Then your fire phase, then your combat phase, then your potentially pursuit phase, followed by this, and that is all for one side, right? And then you go through and do it all again for the second side. Now again, if you had 2 people, it gives the other guy a little bit of a breather while the other person does all his stuff. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and again, I like how the system works. It's just, it's time consuming, and there's a lot of legwork. Let's see, everything is fairly standard regarding command checks, rallying, movement, but when you get to the fire phase, it is not something that is overly complicated. As the phasing player, you mark anybody that can fire, has to fire, so you mark those and fire them. As such, you're going to roll 2d10, 1 for the non-phasing player, 1 for the phasing player. And after you go through all kinds of, well, actually it's not too many modifiers, but here's where some of the time-consuming legwork comes in. You're going to want to check on the label. Let's find an infantry unit. You're going to want to check, so this is the French line. And then you're going to want to know how many, because first of all, I don't have enough bases to play this the way it's meant to be played. So I'm playing with physically about half or less the amount of bases that you would normally have. But again, I only have, I mean, that's the amount of figures I have playing it the way I'm playing it. If you play it the way you're supposed to play it, multiply that by 2, I guess. And I mean, it just becomes impossible. I mean, the table space that I have now is probably bigger than 6x4, and I mean, Jesus, it gets unrealistic. So you want to find out, based on this number here, how many bases are in there, because then that could potentially give you a modifier or two. And then you find who we had, that was a French line, so then you find on this chart the French line and determine if there's a fire modifier, and if there is not. It also lists their range in which they can fire. And then you check this other chart again for the any other modifiers. Like I said, the amount of bases. Is the unit 40? Is it in a square? You know, all that stuff. Then that's to be expected. And then, long story short, if you have as the attacker, if you have, I think it's greater than, I don't remember now. Is it greater than or lesser than? Let's see, where is it? Firing units, resolving fire. If the target's die roll equals or exceeds the firing unit's modified die roll, there is no effect. If the firing unit's modified die roll exceeds the target's die roll but is not double or more the target unit's die roll, you get 1 hit. If it is double or more, you get 2 hits. So that's easy enough, but then you have to take into account that these hits have all kinds of potential adverse effects on the target. So a certain amount of hits can result in a unit becoming, where's the effects of becoming disordered? A unit could rout. You have something called dispersal. There we go. Disorder, rout. You have something called dispersal that you potentially have to deal with. This represents the reduction of a combat unit to the point where it is no longer effective for firing or combat. And then straight out eliminations, which the system does deal with more or less than a system of attrition based on the number of hits. But you have to bear in mind all these things. It isn't just a flat out, oh, they have that many hits. They have X amount of hits, but how does that potentially bring about, again, disorder or rout or dispersal? You have to bear that in mind for each unit, and each unit has different numbers, different disorder, rout, and dispersal numbers depending on the type of unit and the nationality. And you're constantly checking charts and flipping back and forth and looking at stuff and trying to remember things. And again, it's doable, and I don't dislike the system, but like I said, it's a lot of legwork and it's very time consuming. So I probably won't be using Napoleon's battles often, or I will truncate it, abbreviate it, change it accordingly. We'll see. But I did give it a fair shot, and obviously I didn't run through the entire game, the Waterloo scenario. And I should also add that with the turn track here, we have about 7 turns before the Prussians show up, and then I quit. Why? I don't have but a few Prussian landwehr infantry units, but other than that, I have no Prussian cavalry, no Prussian artillery. So as far as representing on the table the Prussians more or less accurately, I can't do that because I just don't have the figures. So once I get to, again, when the Prussians start arriving, that's when I just call it quits. Artillery, it seems like it would have a little bit more impact than it does in the game, but that's how it goes. And plus, what do I know, right? Anything else? I think that about covers it. Also here, this is what I was talking about with the unit label. There's the unit identification, your dispersal number, the original number of figures, which you can determine the number of bases depending on the nationality. So that would typically be, what, 3 bases? Because you put 4 figures to a base, typically. And then the type of unit and nationality, so obviously FR, French, and LC, light cavalry. Then with your leaders, you have your command span, quality level, response number, and combat modifier for combat, or if you like, melee. So that's the game in a nutshell. You've got the ranges here are such that here is your maximum up to 7 inches for artillery to fire, and movement. I didn't change any of those things or shrink them because of table size or anything like that. Pretty generous amounts of movement. With cavalry, you can move up to potentially as much as 15 inches. For instance, French light cavalry, if they're in column, can move up to 15 inches, which is quite a distance. And but it all works out, and the only 2 real features I have here are Hougomont and La Haste represented on the table, and that's it. So that is Napoleon's Battles. If you have a club or wargame group or a dedicated friend, I highly recommend it. If you're solo or wanting something solo, not necessarily, I don't know that I can recommend this. Again, it's a lot of charts flipping. You remember the old Marx Brothers movie, Day at the Races, and Groucho's trying to bet on a horse at the racetrack at one point, and he's getting scammed by I forget the other guy's name that wears the hat, but Groucho's getting scammed because the guy with the hat's selling him these breeder's guides, and he was buying them, and he's checking the breeder's guide, and he's like, it says to look at such and such number, and then he says, well, you don't have that book. He's like, no, well, yeah, you got to buy that book so you can understand what that book. It's kind of that sense of you check one chart, but then you got to correspond that to another chart, and you're bouncing back and forth, and it can be quite a feat. But yeah, so I thought I'd share that with you guys and give you a heads up on that. Again, Napoleon's Battles, probably not something that will become my go-to Napoleonic rules. But yeah, if you guys have any comments of your own regarding the Napoleon's Battle system, or any experience you've had with it, feel free to comment below. Also, hit that subscribe button if you're watching this and you like it. Hit the thumbs up button, and I'll talk to you guys next time.